I'm Rahul Jalalli. I'm going to speak on two subjects of Jammu and Kashmir. One is the media in Jammu and Kashmir, its history, its growth, and its spread today. The other would be people's movement in Jammu and Kashmir. I'll trace in sketch the history of people's movement and participation, both in shaping the state and also in creating structures which empower people within the state. I am a journalist of long standing whose origins are from Jammu and Kashmir, but I've worked all over the world, including reported Kashmir widely. The first subject I begin with is media in Kashmir. Media in Kashmir, if you look at it, actually, if you look at Kashmir, Kashmir has a huge history and tradition of literacy, which dates back to at least about 5,000, or some people suggest that over 5,000 years, going back to 6,000. Sharda, which is the ancient script of Kashmir and also at one point a language, it was treated as a language of Kashmir, has given a lot of very rich literature to the Indian subcontinent, and not only to the Indian subcontinent, but a lot of writings from there and influences of Kashmir have traveled far and wide. In fact, to China at one level and Japan to the other level. In fact, a script of Japan owes its origins to Sharda, as does Gurmukhi. So the main aspects of the books which have been written in Kashmir have been on aesthetics, novels, Kathasarit Sagar, the precursor of Panchtantra, then Abhinav Gupta, his treatise, then of course one should not forget that the original compilation of Rig Veda was by a Kashmiri called Vasuki, and the compilation is in Sharda and was done in 10,046 around that time. So the history of literacy and literature is huge as far as Kashmir is concerned. But when it comes to newspapers, the first newspaper, as we know modern media today, started around the 1920s when a person called Mulkraj Saraf started a newspaper called Ranbir, Daily Ranbir. Daily Ranbir was promoted by the then Maharaja Hari Singh, who was the ruler of Kashmir, who also used to lay a lot of stress on education and promotion of education in Jammu and Kashmir. Daily Ranbir catered both to audiences in Jammu as well as Kashmir, and I'm talking basically of Srinagar and Jammu, the two cities. That's essentially where the circulation was. Ranbir used to cater to local news plus proclamations of the Maharaja. Now, this started the ball rolling, and the next stage of newspapers which came out were part of newspapers which focused on what was then shaping as the people's struggle in Kashmir. That was a product of those movements, and these were part, if you remember, they were more or less part inspired by the freedom struggle which was taking place all over the country, and they reflected those ideas. But substantially, if you look at Jammu Kashmir media, the media in Jammu Kashmir starts post 47. And one of the major points of media in Kashmir and Jammu, mainly Kashmir, because that's where the start takes place, apart from Ranbir being started by a person from Jammu, who Mulkraj Saraf was from Jammu, but also had major roots in Kashmir. But so both Jammu and Srinagar had Daily Ranbir. But subsequently, Srinagar became, in a way, post-47, the main hub of newspaper industry. And Daily Khidmat was one of the other major newspapers which started from Srinagar. Khidmat was totally aligned with the freedom movement and subsequently became a part of the Congress party, but that was much later. After Khidmat, a lot of other papers started from Srinagar, but interestingly, the first English language newspaper, Kashmir Post, started from Srinagar, but attempts were made to start an edition from Jammu also. One of the pioneers of journalism in Kashmir from Jammu, apart from Mulk Raj Saraf and the entire family of Mulk Raj Saraf, his son Om Saraf carried the tradition, and his grandchildren are also in journalism today. But the other major name in Jammu who became a major factor, but mainly in English language journalism, was Ved Bhasin. Ved Bhasin was initially worked with Kashmir Post, and then he sparked off his own newspaper called Kashmir Times. But the language which was predominant in Jammu and Kashmir, in which papers started, were Urdu. So it was Urdu language papers which held domination and held sway in the state. And the main newspapers then in that period were Aftab, Srinagar Times, names like that, which enjoyed a massive circulation. Jammu was a bit lukewarm, tepid, if I might use the word, when it came to media. I'm talking of the 60s. Major media activity for some reason took place in Srinagar. Maybe the character of Jammu, which was more trader oriented then, did not sort of lend a great audience for the newspaper industry to flourish. While Srinagar, which was more oriented towards college and education, etc., had a greater market when it came to newspapers. And also, a Kashmiri on an average is politically far more conscious and aware and politicized because at birth they learn their politics virtually. So the newspaper industry had a market in Srinagar, so that's where it started, or not started, but took on wings. So at a point of time, there were quite a few newspapers around 70s, mainly in Urdu, in Srinagar. Some English language newspapers also started, but the one which actually held domination was Kashmir Times, which was published both simultaneously from Jammu as well as Srinagar. But that was one facet to journalism or media in Kashmir, which was localized newspapers and localized press. There was another major trend, and that was what was called the national press, where correspondents of main newspapers based in Delhi or elsewhere were stationed in Srinagar as well as Jammu, mainly Srinagar, who would then shift for a little while to Jammu. So this was the media world, and mainly in the items, and because Kashmir has always been in the news, given the proclivities of Pakistan, which has always tried to forcibly intervene in Kashmir. So it was always a newsmaker's delight, the valley in particular. Jammu would create or generate news mainly during the winter periods when the government would shift to Jammu. So this was the distribution. Almost from March till November, virtually till late November, early December, Srinagar and Kashmir Valley used to be in focus when it came to news, and especially news for the national papers, as they were called. And Jammu would then occupy center stage for the rest of the period. This was the division. But in this milieu, localized reporting did not, and I emphasize, localized reporting did not proceed at the pace as it should have been. Except for a couple of Urdu newspapers, The only English language newspaper which did manage to keep afloat was Kashmir Times, but it did not have a very wide circulation then. The major break when media is concerned takes place post 90s. But before that, let me also sort of talk about what kind of journalism happened in Kashmir. Most of the journalists around 60s, 70s, and 80s were from Kashmir. Some of the bigger names of journalism in that period were Mr. R.K. Kak, a doyen of journalism. Then there was Mr. O.N. Ganju, P.N. Jalali. Then, of course, there were a host of others. There was Ali Mohammad Sofi from the Srinagar Times, Sanaullah Bhatt, who represented Aftab, and of course Om Saraf Ji Ved Bhasin, who brought the tradition of journalism from Jammu. Normally, the media community in Jammu and Kashmir functioned as a united group. There were no divisions between Jammu media and Kashmir media, and they functioned as one media representing the state. So Jammu and Kashmir never got divided. Apart from that, this was also a period when a lot of journalists from outside Kashmir would also be posted in Kashmir and report for national dailies. Primary among them used to be PTI had people posted in Kashmir and Jammu and Kashmir who would come from Delhi or elsewhere. Kuldeep Nair was one of them, C.P. Maniktala, Bhaskar, BRP Bhaskar came from to report from UNI, Brij Bhardwaj for Hindustan Times. So the S. Vishwam was a statesman who later on became editor of the Deccan Herald, reported from Kashmir. So the milieu of journalism in Kashmir had a huge flavor of national it was an amalgam of various nationalities who would also function from Kashmir, because you also had a lot of foreigners who would report from Kashmir, whether they were from England or usually the Americans would insist on being in Kashmir. So they would also come. But those who were stationed in Jammu and Kashmir were basically either from Jammu, Kashmir, or from rest of the parts of the nation. So it was in a way quite a mix of Indianness, if you look at it, within the state. And I'm talking of the 70s, 80s also, early 80s. This used to be the general mix. The issues which got reported, of course, I talked about local issues, what was happening in Kashmir. Politics was, of course, of the primary concern. Then the politics of separatism, because if you recall, separatism existed in Kashmir for a long time, because Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, before he signed his accord with Indira Gandhi in 1975, functioned as a separatist leader where he had a organization called Plebiscite Front. So this politics of separatism did exist, and it was reported. Interventions by Pakistan, which have always been there, they have always tried to send terrorists in one form or the other and influence Kashmir politics. They did that in 47 when they had this Kabali raid. They did that again in 65 when they sent terrorists as infiltrators into Kashmir under a group called Salahuddin Force, but who were then Kashmiris handed them over to the Indian Army and didn't work out. This was before Pakistan attacked India in 65. So these were the incidents which would be reported. Then incidents of violence which Pakistan would attempt, because look, post-90s is not the only period when Pakistan has played with violence in Kashmir. They've tried it before, a minor bomb blast. You remember the hijacking of the Indian Airlines plane, which happened in 71. So these were the issues which would occupy center space. center stage in reporting from Kashmir. The media in Kashmir was a very alive, and the personnel in Kashmir used to work under tremendous pressure, because whatever was reported from Kashmir very often used to hit the front pages of the national dailies. So the prominence which the state got was far higher at the national level than other states of India. So the journalists, the competence of local media also was far greater than elsewhere. That is something which was noticeable, because they dealt with news reports and substantial reporting almost every day. The other area of concern and of reportage used to be the government activity, what is happening within the government. That was so. As a result, social, cultural, and other activities would take a backseat when reporting was concerned. So this was the period prior to 90s. 90s, a huge change takes over. 90, with the beginning of terrorism, media gets completely knocked. Those who were established journalists before had virtually, a lot of them were forced into exile, especially those belonging to the Kashmiri Pandit community, who were in the forefront of journalism in Jammu and Kashmir, had to move into exile. So there was a virtual vacuum in Kashmir Valley as far as media is concerned. Secondly, what the local newspapers were forced, either they got swayed by the Pakistani propaganda, or they were forced by the gunmen sent by Pakistan, the terrorists, to report only what they wanted. And it became ridiculous that early 90s, there was enough pressure, massive pressure on locals who were working for the government or policemen to resign and to give apologies. So it was ridiculous, the kind of newspapers which would come out of Kashmir, where more than 90% of that newspaper in Kashmir was filled with advertising, asking for mercy and forgiveness and apologies from all these people who had left the government service or left the police. So this was the kind of journalism which took place, which virtually did no credit to media in the valley by any yardstick you might call. It is during this period when things start to stabilize in Kashmir, around 94, 95, when counterinsurgency measures start gaining success and militancy takes a back seat. And in 96, again, the turning point comes when elections are held and a new government comes to power within the valley. With this government, a certain level of relaxation in terrorist activity also takes place, and media starts to regrow. But in this regrowth, I think lines get drawn. The regrowth of media in the valley is very much related to the biases of the media personnel. So ideological influence in Kashmir starts in this period, where the dominant separatist, or rather the separatist ideology dominates over media. This domination takes place out of fear of the gun, because if you try and write a balanced piece which goes against Pakistan or separatism, there is always fear of a terrorist who will come and kill you. And you might recall that many journalists and people from the media person have been killed by terrorists in Kashmir. I think the last number of people who have been victims of terrorism, journalists who have been victims of terrorism in Kashmir, is probably 16. But others who had to run away, who had to hide or leave the valley, their numbers is not even known. It's not counted. But the pressure in which they report, there's hardly any journalist who can really openly write whatever they want to. Secondly, the orientation of the local newspapers, and I'm talking of Kashmir Valley alone, is completely in a way wedded towards separatism, though there are exceptions. I'm not saying all of them are like that. Now, in this milieu, another thing which happened was a huge proliferation of the media. Given that the entry of electronic media, every person in Kashmir became a part of the media. Anyone who owned a camera today is masquerading as a media person. So this is the other thing, this huge, explosion of media in Kashmir. And I think in Srinagar, I believe right now, I don't know who funds them, because also printing technology has become extremely affordable today. So everyone starts a newspaper because they feel they will have some political clout over there. So in last count alone, and the number of Urdu papers in Kashmir Valley was exceeding about 400 to 500 dailies, and I'm talking of dailies. So, and they didn't have any, it's impossible for so many people to have this kind of circulation, but they do thrive, or they do exist. And normally, many of them, given the atmosphere, resort to blackmail. But also a proliferation of English newspapers took place, where earlier, I'm talking of pre-90s, one English newspaper would in the state would find it difficult to survive. Now there are 3-4 newspapers in Kashmir in English who survive. Similarly in Jammu. Now, when it comes to Jammu, a similar thing happens in Jammu. Look, there is a major influx of Kashmiri Pandits and other migrants who come to Kashmir and come from Kashmir and settle in Jammu. The number of people who are interested in reading swells in Jammu, which caters to a similar exposure in press within Jammu region. As a lot of dailies start. Interestingly, Jammu has a proliferation of English language dailies, which I find amusing, because once I did a survey, which was about 2 years ago, I found to my amazement that there were 200 English dailies being printed in Jammu city alone. I do not know whether there are 200 readers of English language newspapers in Jammu. The similar trend also started in Jammu. A lot of funders, anyone who had some surplus money would start a newspaper. And again, the proliferation of the electronic media. Unfortunately, in this kind of exercise, biases became predominant, and honest journalism took a big beating. I'm not suggesting that there is all dark here. There is some fantastic, phenomenal journalism and very brave journalists who are working. We're working in both Jammu as well as the Valley. You find some very good reports which take place both on the television as well as the print media. That is happening. But a new element of hope which I find, where I see a lot of positive journalism happening, is in these new portals which are coming up on the net. These are news portals, and I find some incredibly good reporting which is taking place on Jammu and Kashmir in this portal. But one essential element of change from the beginning, or rather post-independence, post-47 till 89, at that time the media in the state was a state media, unified. Media in Jammu, Kashmir, and even those Ladakh was not big, and Ladakh was looked as one single entity. Now this is what broke. 90s led to a complete division. Post-90s, its media is sort of, you either have a Jammu media or you have a Kashmir media. Ladakh media has just started. In fact, there are some very good magazines, 2 magazines which are being printed from Leh, and they are doing pretty okay. They've survived for at least about 3 years that I'm aware of. Plus, a lot of Ladakhi journalists are putting their matter on the net. But in Ladakh, it's the beginning. And they are also doing journalism which is more localized and sellingly, or rather projectingly, towards to the others across the nation plus worldwide. The other factor which I see is an obsession of journalists in Kashmir with terrorism. They have nothing else to report. Separatism or terrorism, whether pro or anti. Politics predominant. Predominance of politics in newspaper industry. Nothing else. It's all ignored. Also, very localized city-centric reporting. In Jammu, for instance, other regions of Jammu are completely neglected by the media. You will hardly find either the obsession is with cross-border firing, what happens at the border, or reporting about politics about Jammu. But what happens in other regions of Jammu like Bhadarwah, like Kishtwar, unless it is political, you won't find much of a reporting. Bhadarwah, which is a region of Jammu which is probably more attractive than Kashmir, has never been projected or hardly been projected by the state media for its beauty, that it could become another source of touristic attraction, beating or competing with Kashmir Valley. This is a projection which has never been done. So these are the issues about media in Jammu Kashmir. First, starts off as a unified factor in the state. Jammu, Kashmir, and a smattering of media in Ladakh act as one. Post-90s, the break comes. Jammu gets divided, the media in Jammu. Kashmir media functions on its own. So the unity which was there was over. But again, things are reversing. We are going back to post-47, pre-90s era. I know a lot of journalists from Kashmir who are beginning to report events in Jammu, and journalists from Jammu who are beginning to report events from Kashmir. So I think we are going back to the old era where people from different regions would be writing about each other and reporting about each other. So the state functions again in the media as one whole. Well, that probably sums up the history and the story of media in Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you very much for paying attention to what you heard.